Okay, Aiden, I'm just going to, I can't seem to, won't let me spotlight you because you don't have your video on, but if you'd just like to speak, that would be perfect.
No worries. Sorry about my video.
No, so fine.
Just for some reason it's decided not to work today, but I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're meeting on today, and pay my respect and our respects to the elders past, present, and future of each of those cultures. I'd also like to note that we are all meeting on different lands. I'm presuming majority of Sydney, but extend that respect to all the owners of all the lands that we are meeting on today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Aiden. If you know what Indigenous land you're zooming in from today, please feel free to drop it in the chat. I know the university is based on Gadigal land, and I'm based in Darug-and-Guringai country. So firstly, we've got a few housekeeping things to go through before we get started today. If everyone could please click the link that Angelina has sent into the chat, provided to register your attendance. If you don't do this, we won't have any evidence that you attended this event for voting rights in upcoming elections. If you have any questions for the panel, please pop them in the chat, or if you would like to send them anonymously, please message them to Nicole Baxter. We plan to record this session for people who were interested in attending but are unable to make it today. So if you're uncomfortable with being recorded, that is totally fine. You're more than welcome to leave the panel and watch the recording once it's released, or we can remove your name after if it pops up on the screen. There's also no pressure, as I said before, to turn on cameras, but feel free to if you like. That would be wonderful. Okay, so a little bit about myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Zara Thompson. I'm the current SASS Women's Officer. I'm studying a Bachelor of Arts in Advanced Studies, majoring in politics and psychology. So a bit of context. For many students, thinking about the future can be quite daunting and scary, particularly within an arts degree with all the stigma surrounding it. And I've definitely felt that hearing from others about their experiences in the workforce from a variety of perspectives is helpful for achieving a sense of clarity and peace of mind about what happens after you graduate, and can spark interest about potential fields of work. Along with my team, we felt that there was an untapped opportunity to bring women and the community together to learn about your future as an arts grad, a leader, navigating your career, and how being a woman ties into that. This evening, we hope to share some insights into various industries from some truly inspiring voices, and hope that everyone tuning in today or watching this recording at a later date can take away something valuable. And that extends to everyone, regardless of your lived experience or gender expression. Today's topics surround the value of an arts degree, leadership, the influence of gender, and how to make the most of networking and mentoring opportunities. Today, I have 4 wonderful panelists with a vast range of experiences, career paths, and passions. I would like to welcome in alphabetical order Bianca Farmakis, a journalist for 9.com.au, specialising in advocating for women's issues through her media platform. Her media coverage recently resulted in being nominated for Mumbrella's Young Writer of the Year. Dr. Meg Foster is an award-winning academic and historian, focusing on bushranging, settler-colonial and public history, and is currently a research fellow here at the University of Cambridge. Olivia Pirie-Griffiths is the Executive Director at the Alliance for Journalist Freedoms, an organisation that works with the government to ensure press freedoms for journalists in Australia and in the Asia-Pacific region. Jessica Sugih is a passionate risk and insurance analyst working at Steadfast Group, involved in the formation of Steadfast Risk Group and broader corporate development targeted at improving opportunities for businesses and insurance brokers within the insurance market. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourselves? Maybe tell us about your uni degrees and majors, about your career histories, and some more insight into what you do in your current role. Let's start with Bianca.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Bianca. I am a journalist. Sorry, I said this earlier, actually. I'm never good at answering questions because I'm too busy asking them. But I studied media communications and arts at the University of Sydney. something, and it was literally just like, I have absolutely no interest in anything whatsoever. I had no skills in anything whatsoever as well. So it was really just like gun to my head, this is all I can do. And, you know, very fortunately since then, I have managed to survive in the field, I guess. I don't very much have a conventional journalism background. So, I mean, I started in newspapers, got fired at the age of 18, thought I would never work again. Lo and behold, here we are. Don't ask why. It's not interesting. It's actually just embarrassing. Anyway, then I did a brief foray in PR, completely respect the profession, but it was not in love with it. So I went back into video production for a few years. And then when I was graduating, I actually went and worked for an overseas company in Japan. And at this rate, like, I was very basic news kind of coverage journalist, and I ended up covering the North Korean missile crisis. So are we allowed? We're not allowed to swear. Okay, I was gonna say I shit myself, but
that's fine. I mean, that would be the reality.
I really did. It was terrifying, but it was amazing. And then coming home, I started with Channel 9, which I've been at for 3 years now. And I guess from there, like, I really did start kind of in, you know, generic social media producer role, and kept, you know, stressing that I am a good writer, e.g., there's nothing else I can do. And I've recently come off the back of leading a very important investigation that did earn me the award nomination. Thank you for mentioning it, because I've vowed I will mention it at the pub till the day I die now. I didn't win, if anyone's wondering, but, you know, it just gives me more agency to talk about something without sounding too arrogant. But that was about, I broke the story about Chanel Contos's sexual assault in schools petition and changing the consent curriculums. And yeah, I mean, it's been an amazing career thus far. I mean, I've been out of uni for, when did I graduate? I don't even want to know. I think 3 years now, 3 years. And in that time, like, I've been nearly arrested in Vietnam for trying to be a journalist and had to bribe my way into the country. I've worked in Japan on everything from, you know, an extreme missile crisis to the Olympics, which at the time they all thought was going to be in 2020. Little did we know. And then my first day as a full-time Australian reporter was nationwide lockdown. So, you know, people always told me I was dramatic, and it's truly shown in my professional life.
Great. Thank you so much, Bianca. I think that will segue really nicely to Olivia. Could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. And I'll start by saying that, Bianca, I'm glad that I know of you now. When you next get in trouble, I'll do my best to help. So my name's Olivia Pirie-Griffiths. I'm the executive director of the So we are an organisation founded by Peter Grester. I'm not sure if you guys would remember, but in 2013-14, there was this big hoopla about an Australian journalist who was working for Al Jazeera, who had been accused of being a terrorist, essentially, and was thrown into prison in Egypt. And he stayed there for 400 days for doing his job. And so when he was finally released after that amount of time, he and two of the people who were formative in designing the strategy to help secure his release founded the organisation which I now run. So we work with government, as Zara said. We try and work collaboratively with government to introduce legislation that protects the ability for journalists to practice proper journalism in Australia, which seems like it would be something that, you know, every democracy would have, right? But funnily enough, Australia is one of the few democracies in the world that doesn't have those legislative protections. So we try and introduce those protections so that we can balance things like our national security laws with the public's right to know, which is, as you guys will know, is a fundamental pillar of a democracy. So that's what we do here. And then why part of Bianca's speech particularly piqued my ears up is because we also work to try and support journalists who've been threatened or censored or imprisoned or sometimes horribly killed in the Asia Pacific region. So we do that by running public campaigns and also fundamentally trying to build behind the scenes relationships with governments and diplomats and stuff like that, which is a slow process, but we are trying. And so I've been there for 3 years. I was an arts degree graduate, and then I did my honours in philosophy. I'd always been focused in the classics and had no clue what I was going to do, because I didn't, unlike Meg, did not have the rigour to be a wonderful academic. So what I did was just, I finished the honours in philosophy and then realised that I loved that. And so I knocked on the door at the Ethics Centre. I'm not sure if you guys know of them, but Centre for Applied Ethics. Banged down the door there until they gave me a coffee, and then they finally gave me an internship. And then after that, they hired me. And then after that, I sort of just wound my way through the not-for-profit space until I found the role that I'm currently in now, which I deeply love. And so it's been an interesting, windy trajectory, and I had no idea that this is where I would end up, but I've trusted my gut the whole way through. And so, and I hope to continue doing that. Yeah, that'll do for me for now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Olivia. And you cut out a bit earlier, so I'll just reiterate. It was for the Alliance for Journalist Freedoms that Olivia is the executive director of. Meg, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. My name's Dr. Meg Foster, and I'm going to plug the Dr. bit because I always get a kick out of doing that too.
Absolutely.
My PhD took me 5 years, so I'm just going to use it as much as possible, and it always gives me a kick as well that it's a non-gendered suffix that's to do with accomplishment as well. I am an historian, I'm an academic, I'm also a consultant historian, and today I'll try to draw a distinction between the academic side of things and the consultant side of things, because they are quite different. I'm currently a research fellow at Newnham College at the University of Cambridge, so that's the academic part, but I'm also a consultant historian on the side. So I've worked in TV, pre-production, I've worked with collaborating with different artists, I've worked for heritage consultancy companies, so I've got quite a bit of experience there. I did a BA at Sydney University. Originally I wanted to do arts law, but in my 18-year-old mind, it had to be at Sydney because of the sandstone. And I was 0.5 of a mark below the ATAR cutoff for arts law combined. So I was like, okay, I will just do arts first and then I'll do the law. And yeah, I kind of didn't leave. I majored in history and sociology, although I also did some English as well. I did my honours in history. It wasn't a natural progression to a PhD. I didn't know what would kind of come of that. I took a year off, a gap year in 2014. But after honours, I sent out lots of different applications to any type of history related museum, heritage company, organisation that I could think of, because I just wanted some type of work vaguely in my field of interest. Depressingly, a lot of them didn't get back to me at all, despite my perfectly crafted cover letters. But the Australian Centre for Public History did, and that's how I got my first history consultancy job. I worked, yeah, it was really good. I worked with Professor Paul Ashton there, and we were looking at new directions in public history. And I ended up writing a piece on how the digital world has changed how we interact with the past, and also what is the point of historians if people can go out and do their own history now, if they don't need access through historians to get to the past. And my article argued that, yes, we still do need historians, but not in the way that we might think. So after I worked there, I did my gap year. I went through Europe and decided that I was in love with Australian history still. And so I did a PhD at the University of New South Wales. During that time, I also was a visiting student at the University of Cambridge. And it may seem a bit contradictory, or at least not self-evident, why I went to Cambridge. My PhD was in non-white male bushrangers. Bushranging is obviously a very Australian phenomenon. I gave papers over there and people didn't get what a bushranger was. But I wanted to go over there because A, I wanted to expand my networks. B, the people I was looking at an African-American man, a Chinese man, as well as Aboriginal people as well. And I wanted to get that broader international and transnational perspective of these people's lives. And that also helped with networking. And I'm now currently at the University of Cambridge. I have a research fellowship. We'll probably talk in a bit more depth about the kind of struggles of academia later on, but I should say from the get-go, it looks very prestigious, and it is. It's great. I love it. I had 26 failed applications for other fellowships for different Cambridge colleges because you have to apply directly to the college.
Wow.
So, I mean, I'm very pro, there's an academic movement to write a CV of your rejections alongside a CV of your achievements, because we only see the shiny polished side, and that is really a part of my experience. So it was very hard to get here. It's a 3-year fellowship, and I mean, academia is obviously not the best place to be at the moment with funding cuts, so I'm not quite sure what will happen after that. But yeah, I can't do anything other than history now. It's a big part of how I see myself and what I think is my kind of important contribution of something I can actually give to society that isn't there before. And yeah, that's my little synopsis.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think it's just amazing to see how much passion everyone brings to their role, and not necessarily knowing where they were going to go, what they were going to do, and their arts degrees have actually helped them with that. And before we move on to Jess, I'm going to take this opportunity to change your name to Dr. Meg Foster. If you're happy for me to refer to you as Dr. Meg, I will do so. We definitely value education.
No, good. Just Meg is fine.
And that segues really lovely and nicely into Jessica. What do you do?
Yeah, so please call me Jess. Only my mom calls me Jessica when I'm in trouble. or actually, people at work who don't know me well will call me Jessica. So that's usually the bar of how much someone knows me. So I'm Jess. I did a Bachelor of Commerce and Arts at UNSW back when it was called that. I think it's different now. I basically work as a risk and insurance analyst. Sounds really boring. It's actually not. So I work for a company called Steadfast Group, and essentially what it is if you know what insurance is, it's basically a bunch of insurance brokers in a network, and then we and the company, you know, has a lot of reach within Australia, New Zealand, and abroad as well. So I've only been there quite recently, actually, and actually prior to that, I worked as a consultant, like an operations transformation consultant at a company called Accenture. So I kind of did more of like management consulting. Basically, part of what I did in my role, and this is all personal experience, but I basically told how you know, rich companies how to make more money and how to leech more money of poor people. And you know, it's interesting because I never thought I would do that, not in a million years. But I think yeah, that's sort of what I landed in. And funnily enough, you know, all the other panelists, you know, you guys have such amazing like stories. How I ended up getting a job in consulting is I was bored out of my mind in a philosophy tutorial. Actually, no, it was a seminar. We had a seminar and we were reading through Plato or something. And I was like, I didn't even do these readings. Like, you do all these readings for arts. I'm like, oh my goodness, like I did not do that. So I was on Facebook back when like that was a thing, and I saw an ad for this company. I was like, I really should think about getting a grad job, because I don't really have a plan. Like I didn't do an internship or you know, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I essentially applied for a company and a job I had no idea about. Somehow I made it to the last interview round, and at the interview, the boss, basically the managing director, asked me what my technical skills were and what I liked about the company. And basically I just said, I don't have any technical skills, but I know how to think. And apparently that was good enough to get the job. So, you know, from there, I kind of did consulting for a bit. It was really great. I really loved it. And it was not acquainted to what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I ended up getting an opportunity to work at Steadfast, funnily enough. And what I thought originally the role was a research analyst, I was like, great, I won't have to talk to anyone. I won't have to do anything but go on a computer and search and research some random things and find some data points, and then I can just go home. But I think it's turned out a lot more interesting than that. And definitely, I think we can touch on it later. But I think whatever you decide to do after, and definitely true from my experience, is definitely what you make it to be. So it's not, you know, you graduate, you have a perfect cookie cutter view of what life or job will be or career will be, and that will be given to you. It's sort of what you want to make of it. And I think especially as art students, I think the one thing that is so undervalued is your ability to make something, literally something, out of nothing. So I remember when I was doing my very last minute essays that I had many weeks to do, and I did in the last minute, which
we've all been there. We've all been there.
You know, that's literally making something out of nothing. And in reality, that's a lot of what the real world is like. Like, you're not going to have a perfect timeline for things. So I think there's so many great skills to learn. And also I think one thing I really valued and has really been such an important part of my career so far and work is actually being confronted by people that have different opinions to you. And I think often, you know, there is a perception that everyone's educated, everyone has the same background as you, like you'll just get along. And that's totally not the case. So especially in insurance, you work in a largely male-dominated industry, and of people who've worked there for 30, 40 plus years, you know. So it definitely has challenged me to kind of think beyond the cookie cutter approach, even more so than when I was in consulting. Because in many cases, when I was in consulting, everyone was happy for you to bring your different opinions to the board. That's what you paid for. That's what people wanted. Whereas that's not always the case. And so I think that's where I've really been able to apply stuff that I've learned in my arts degree, which, may I say, my parents did not agree for me to do. They really wanted me to do law. And I said, yeah, but I don't really want to study for 5 years.
Fair enough.
You know, I just want to, I don't know, do something that I enjoy. So yeah,
absolutely. I think that actually segues really nicely into our first set of questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing a little bit about yourselves and what interests you. I think that's a really great way to kick us off and get us started into the questions and topics that we're going to learn about today. I think we've already learned so much already. So let's get straight into it. I'm sure everyone's itching to hear more. So I guess the first thing, like, and one of the most popular things that we discussed with our team when building this was there's a lot of stigma around arts degrees, and particularly surrounding the limits or employability of arts graduates. Could you tell us the value of being an arts grad? And that is, what is your experience as an arts graduate been like? And we might start with you, Meg.
Thank you. Yeah, as I said in my introduction, I didn't just plan to do arts. I intended to do law, and that was because law seemed like the one with the most clear-cut career path. Arts was something that I wanted to do because I was passionate about it. Law was something I wanted to do because I could see how that would move me into a career where I could, you know, make money and sustain myself. That being said, obviously I stuck with arts. I haven't left. And I think that my arts degree, it's not an indulgence. That's the first thing I would say. I mean, it is a privilege to be able to go to university and pursue something you're passionate about, but it's not an indulgence in the sense that, as Jessica was saying, or Jess, sorry, was saying, we get to encounter so many different perspectives and so many different voices. But the thing that kind of, I was thinking about the questions we were talking about today, and that really strongly came to mind as kind of a theme that I kept coming back to. An arts degree teaches you about power.
Absolutely. That's half of my degree.
Exactly. And in so many different ways, like I can think of an example of every single, you know, arts topic, from something like medieval literature through to sociology, is going to tell us something about power and something about the way the world works that we wouldn't otherwise understand. So to give an example from my own research, once again, history, what is the point of history? Well, the people I'm looking at for my book and looked at for my thesis, they were excluded from the national narrative about bushrangers. And obviously bushrangers are people who are national icons. Why were they excluded? Well, it's because of race and gender.
Yeah.
It's because colonial ideas of race and gender were racist and sexist. And that has filtered through into the contemporary national imaginary. And you can see how leaving people who are racially or through their gender are different to the white male hero out of that national discussion is perpetuating those systems that have been in place since the colonial period.
Mm.
And so something that happened hundreds of years ago is still influencing the national imaginary, the national discussion, the way we see ourselves, the way we talk about ourselves as a nation.
Yeah, I think that can absolutely tie into, I guess, the stigma of arts degrees and why they might not be viewed as valuable. And particularly if you're a woman, I know just from my personal experience, like I've had a lot of older people tell me, oh, it's just like a degree that people do before they go off and get married. And it's like, that's not true, particularly in today's society where expectations of women are changing, and they have a lot more freedom. They're not just expected to get married really early and then settle down and have kids and drop out of their arts degree. Arts degrees have such substance and value, even though it's totally valid, obviously. And if people want to do that, go for their lives. But if people also want to pursue careers, I think women have so much more of an opportunity to do that. Thank you so much for sharing that, Meg. And I'll kind of throw this to Jessica as well. Sorry, Jess, you were speaking earlier about kind of being able to make something out of nothing, and that there's critical thinking skills. How has that been valuable to you?
Yeah, look, I would not recommend that. This is not advice to tackle your degree. I was actually thinking about just about my degree and just going back. My parents didn't actually know what I studied until the end of my degree. So when I told my mom that I studied international relations, she was like, politics? What's that? You studied the election? So she thought that for the whole tenure I was at uni. But I think that kind of speaks volumes to what people's perceptions are to what an arts degree is. And definitely when I was at uni, I often kind of hung around two different crowds. You kind of had, the business people who were like, yep, I'm going to earn stacks and stacks of cash. My life is set. I'm just here to churn and burn and get a degree. And that's just set and forget. And I had another whole world where people were really passionate about what they were doing. They really cared about things that are happening in society, really introspective. All those things I think are so valuable, especially when you're going through that time at university. It's just really valuable. If anything, I learned so much about myself. And that's not what you can get a lot of the time. And not a lot in a context where you're surrounded and you're constantly challenged by your to think outside your own ways of thinking. You're just challenged by all different opinions, and that's just so valuable, I think, in who you are as a person, but also the way that you construct your worldview.
Absolutely.
And how you treat other people. Those things, fundamental, I think, of being a person. It was just so valuable to me. And funnily enough, my partner, he studied criminology, so under the arts faculty as well. And sometimes the way that we relate to each other and how we relate to other people is just so different. There is a sense of, okay, let's actually understand what we're trying to talk about. It's okay if we don't have the same opinions all the time. Where that's human nature and that's who we are as people. And so I think it's been really valuable taking that into a work context and, building resilience through that, and also being able to stand your ground, and shape kind of how you want to dictate where you're going with things. So
yeah,
I don't know if
sure.
I answered the question or Zara.
No,
Maybe
that's
that's
like no, that's great. I think it's kind of what I picked up there was that arts degrees give you a very broad range of skills, but through your majors, you can also specialize in certain things and build different worldviews. I know for myself as a politics student, like it is so much more than just it. Like it often has nothing to do with elections. You're learning so much more about theory, and it really does help you construct the way that you see the world and the way that you can make things better. And so, yeah, I think that's super beneficial. Thank you so much for that. So I guess we could talk about like what we think maybe the disadvantages of an arts degree could be. I think maybe in the context of like, do employers maybe see this as a bit too general, or do they actually value it? Do they take that into account and think that broad skills are more employable these days?
Can I jump in, Zara?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's, and forgive me for swearing, but any employer who doesn't recognise the benefit of an arts degree, I mean, the stigma firstly is a crock of shit. And any employer who doesn't recognise the benefit of an arts degree is not a good employer, I would suggest. We're at a point, I loved what Meg said about power. I'd never considered that. That's really fascinating. And I want to reflect on that for a while. And resilience as well, Jess, really interesting too, because we're at a point where, you know, culturally, socially, across the world, we're dealing with things like misinformation and the fracturing of our societies and democracies. And I know that we've mentioned this already, but the fact that an arts degree teaches you how to think means rather than just funneling you through a degree that then, and I'm not suggesting that other degrees aren't worthwhile, obviously, but there is a difference between an arts degree that allows you freedom in your thought.
For sure.
In comparison to something like law, for example. And that skill is so important, especially at this moment in time, because we all need to be active participants in our societies and democracies, and an arts degree teaches you how to do that. And I think that is fundamental. And any employer who's worth their, what's the expression? Yeah. Whatever, who's they will recognize that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I think like politics extends to your employers in terms of how they're going to value you. And so I think that speaks really nicely to that. Let's move on a little bit and kind of change pace. How have you approached communicating your art skills from your degree to your employer? Bianca, would you like to take this one?
I'm laughing because I was one of those people who thought an arts degree was useless. And I actually never wanted to go to uni. I had a gun to my head on that one. For context, I come from a migrant family who wasn't educated past the age of 10. So it was truly, you have no option. But in terms of communicating those skills, it's, again, a double-edged sword, because in my field, I've constantly been told by people, you know, that have been very impressed by what I achieved academically, which, for full clarity, was a 53 wham. I bombed uni hardcore, could not have cared less about it. Definitely don't encourage that in hindsight. But they always told me you actually didn't need a degree to do the job I'm doing. That being said, I think in terms of the pace of change in which we've seen in the world, which I know has been ongoing for decades and decades, but has truly accelerated, I would say, in the past 5 years, particularly in the last 3 I've been working, is that older generations and younger generations, sorry to generalize, but there's such like an inherent disconnect between social values, between what equality looks like, how it manifests in any facet of this world, whether it's in the realm of communication, leadership structures, XYZ, inside every paradigm. And I think a big part of that is because there wasn't that focus on critical analysis and kind of understanding a multitude of perspectives, or even understanding, to reference Dr. Meg, like historical fact of the reason why we got to where we are has been very clearly written in stone. And being able to express that, and from the plane of a young person as well that has understood these things and has learnt these aspects of how our society shifted and changed. And I say progress, I mean regress, to be honest. I'm very cynical. Is something that I think has set me apart. I think has definitely set my peers apart in our field, and it's breeding a whole new world. I would hope a much better world of how we translate information. So yeah, I mean, I know I came out swinging with like, I don't care about uni. All I want to do is work. I don't believe in higher education. And I've very strongly retreated on that ignorant point.
I mean, that's the benefit of hindsight. Right?
That's the benefit of an arts degree. You learn how full of shit you are.
Did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and say two things. The first thing is that for me, an arts degree is a bit like a choose your own adventure. There's no one way through, but that doesn't mean you don't get somewhere good. And I also kind of want to use our critical thinking skills. To be honest, I think that the idea that an arts degree is a disadvantage or that it's somehow an inferior degree is itself a political construct.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I love constructivism. That's right up my alley. So
that's something we really need to bear in mind, especially considering that so many of the politicians who actually passed the job ready graduates law themselves had arts degrees and benefited from free education and the right to choose what direction their degree went. So I don't necessarily think that employers see arts degrees as inferior at all. So many people have gone so many amazing places with that as their foundation. So I think that some of it is actually just political discourse that then we in turn are internalizing, or people who don't have experience in certain sectors of the workforce are then kind of, I guess parents do want their children to have a clear path. So it is something I can understand why parents might actually prefer you to go down, medicine or whatever else. But just being aware of the political context, I think, is quite important, and trying to actually map that onto the reality of what employers are looking for when so many employers themselves have this as their experience.
Yeah, for sure. I think that also can speak to for everyone to kind of take away and think about, well, how can I communicate my skills to my employer, knowing that majority of the time they're going to value that you have an arts degree, and so it can give you more confidence to speak on your skills, speak on the development of your critical thinking, speak to your majors, what you've learned from that. So that's a really nice touch. Thank you so much, Meg. I think we've spoken a little bit about kind of the future of an arts degree is a bit more directed by this political context. So I guess my question would be then is, what do you think the value of an arts degree is going to be in the future, particularly, and I guess like an increasingly unstable political world, and I guess looking to enact change either in your career or just in your personal life?
I'm going to come out and say it. Sorry to jump in again.
No,
I think that an arts degree is almost foundational for citizenship.
Yep.
Because you can't understand what's happening. You can't look past the BS. You can't see the fake news. You can't understand your place in the world unless you have critical thinking skills that are taught in an arts degree. So I think that actually raising the price of an arts degree and making out like it's not actually appropriate for life or the workforce is undermining the foundation of democracy. And that seems like a big statement, but I firmly believe that.
No, I'm right with you,
So
Megan.
fair.
Completely agree.
Yeah, I think, look, I think most people here that are doing an arts degree would probably agree with that, because they are doing it for a reason, even if that reason is, I don't know what I want to do. Like someone said earlier, it's a choose your own adventure. And I think that's really beautiful. Awesome. So let's kind of change the tune a bit. I want to talk about leadership, and particularly leadership as a woman. And we'll kind of, for everyone that's tuning in, we'll get into girlboss culture and hustle culture in a second. But firstly, I'd like to talk about, what does leadership mean to you in your field? Jess, would you like to start with this one?
Yeah, great, Zara. I was just thinking about that. Okay, so I obviously work in like financial services, and if anyone is interested, it's a great sector to be in. It's been around ages longer than I've been around by 10 times. And there's a lot of history behind that, actually. Typically in financial services, it's a very conservative way of viewing leadership. So depending on the organization you work for, and there's been a lot of progress, you know, in terms of organizations, people and culture, and that's a lot to do with just changing society in general, and shift in the workforce itself, right? That's a huge thing, and more I think employers are starting to realize that the human element is what makes an organization, and without that, it doesn't benefit anyone. There's no value to that.
So would you say then, like, an ability to connect with other people on a genuine level is like a way of showing leadership?
That's what I think it is. I don't know whether that is something, from my personal experience, that I've seen is practiced throughout in reality. And the reason why I say that is, again, I think it comes down to there are norms, and no one really likes change. As much as we like to profess,
particularly in the insurance industry.
You know, and that's okay, because I think especially with an arts degree, at least for me, you know, coming out of university, it's like, like everything is changing. Like what I learned last semester is not the same as this semester. I'm being challenged by the person who I did the same class with like 3 weeks ago. Like he has a different, or she has a different opinion on what we just spoke about. But I think often leadership can be seen as sort of power plays often in sort of the industry that I work in. But that's not to say that you can't change that.
Absolutely.
Not to say that there is no sense of empowerment, but again, that looks a bit different for everyone. And I think, like, again, I personally think it's what you make of it, and how you want to see things flow and develop and grow. So
absolutely. I think it's also, like, just on that point, it's almost upon us to create the change. Like, if things aren't changing, you see there's an issue, speak about it, speak up about it. And I think that ties really nicely into what I'm going to ask you, Olivia. How do you, I guess, approach leadership in your field? What does it mean to you?
I've been stewing on this because it's an interesting question, and in many ways I'm very much just beginning to learn about it. You know, the AJF is this tiny organization. It's literally the board, me, and a researcher and a volunteer. So it's tiny, but that said, I lead the board in some ways, or have to wrangle them. And so there is certainly leadership that I'm beginning to employ. And I guess fundamentally have learnt from the board over the last 3 years, having had, and I'll get to this when we speak about gender, having had some difficult experiences in leadership in my career before I came to this role. But I've been really, I don't want to say fortunate, because it hasn't been fortune. It's been a concerted effort by the 3 board members who run the organisation. I've been constantly supported by them and lifted up by them, so that I can lead literally every day, and every day since I started the job. So my perspective of leadership is that it's inherently tied to support.
Absolutely.
And that, and if it's not, then something is going awry. I also think, what was it? Authenticity, Jess, the authenticity that you mentioned is something that I think is really fundamental to it as well. And was actually a point that I was going to make more broadly, just about how I've traversed or navigated since my arts degree up until now, and how I hope to continue traversing it in the future. And that is with authenticity, because I think it's the most useful tool that you have in your box, almost, because
absolutely,
that's you know.
Yeah, I really do want to emphasize that point because I think authenticity is something that can get really lost. And I think it's so important to ground yourself and to be really genuine in your connections and your conversations and learning things from others, but also standing your ground. So I think that's really awesome. And I totally agree. Authenticity is a really important thing. And I think in your arts degree, because you are communicating with people, particularly with SASS, you're communicating with people who have different backgrounds, who have different majors. You can connect with them on a different level, even if you don't have the same interests or passions. And I guess bringing yourself to that authentically can really engage those conversations and build your network. And we'll talk about networking later. So we'll get into girlboss culture. I know a few people are very excited to talk about this. I personally myself love to kind of talk about it. So it's a really popular trope in media, particularly across, I think everyone who is on Instagram by now will be familiar with affirmations and girlboss affirmations. And while I think they're great memes, there's also some truth to like how that is being brought up in media and discourse. And I think that there are some positives and negatives to it. So we want to get right into that. I think we'll start talking about maybe the negatives first. Like, what are your thoughts on the rise of hustle culture and the girl boss mentality? Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think it can maybe actually be limiting for some people, or is it perpetuating negative stereotypes? Kind of just want to blow this wide open. So if anyone wants to talk about their thoughts on girl boss culture, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I'll go in on this one.
Great.
I think sorry, am I interrupting anyone?
No, go.
Right. I think girl boss culture is the biggest stain on economic development and social development, particularly for women, because it is absolutely ridiculous. And I apologize if I offend anyone. I also don't care. Because to think that emulating the same regressive, very atrocious and very irresponsible ways people have demonstrated leadership, and I use people, we all know who I mean, in the past, absolutely changes nothing, absolutely achieves nothing except the same kind of mediocre standard of what we've seen. And I think my issue with girl boss culture is that it's very white feminist, which is, I don't mean that like white women as a whole. I mean that in the specific strain of like women acting like the same regressive men to step on people on their way to the top, with very limited empathy, very little limited kind of approach to the craft or whatever the goals are of whatever field you're in as a whole. And I think girl boss culture is it stigmatized? Yeah, I guess it's like delved into the fray of being memed now.
Yeah, for sure. I think that can almost be like, it's funny, but it can also be toxic. And so I totally agree with you there.
It's so funny, but all toxic things are typically quite funny. And that's why I laugh when I talk about it, because I've seen it play out. I mean, I'm in an industry where I should probably be careful when I say this, but there are so
got Olivia here, you're right.
Yeah. Finally, there are so many egos, there are so many people, and I would say like men are victim to girl boss culture as well. I know plenty of male girl bosses that just kind of have this, I would root the problem of girl boss culture in kind of this centricity on, I know what I want, I know what I'm doing, I know that I'm right, rather than what can I learn, how can we develop, what is the aim that we all hope to achieve. And that's why I have such an issue with it, because if there's one thing I've truly learned and like have been slapped down in the face throughout my career, particularly like from arts degree to career progression as well, is that there are two universal facts outside of death and taxes in this world. And that is you will never know everything. And that is why you should always open your ears and listen first.
Absolutely.
Girl boss culture is too focused on break through the glass ceiling, queen. Like, fuck me, everyone wants to do that. What else do you want to achieve?
Yeah, for sure. I think girl boss culture can also remove empathy from behavior, I suppose. If like all you're doing is stepping on other people's toes to get somewhere, at the end of the day, that's not great. That kind of sucks. So I really agree that like it takes out that empathy. And I think something that we've talked about a lot already is the authenticity. And if you authentically are a terrible person, well, I can't speak to that, but
be it as genuinely as possible. If you're a terrible person, this is what I mean. Like, I do have an issue with awful people existing in this world, but like, if they're transparent about it, I think a crucial part of leadership is self-awareness. And if you're going to conduct yourself as a leader, don't put up this mentality of like, oh, I'm saving the world and I'm doing this and I'm raising up voices with me. Are you actually? And how are you doing that? And where have you learned to do that?
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Why have they taught you? I think that's the biggest part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone else want to kind of bounce off that?
I was just going to jump in and say that I think that there's a difference between girl boss and hustle culture.
Yeah.
One is kind of like a very deliberate personality type that aims to get to the top to the detriment of everyone else, kind of like damn everyone else. Hustle culture is sometimes necessary in certain industries, including mine. Like, obviously, like as a freelance consultant, it's kind of, you need to be outgoing, you need to actually have a few things on the go, you need to take every opportunity. But even in academia, and I don't know how many people want to go into academia. It's incredibly fraught. Okay. Like, once again, there are egos, there are personalities. Casualization is rife. The fact that I have a 3-year fellowship is like, basically it's a unicorn job to have like 3 years of stability. Usually most of your tutors or lecturers are bouncing semester contract to contract, not sure whether they're going to get something else. They need to pander to the coordinator who's, been doing this for umpteen years. Usually you've got to have a few things on the side as well. And the people you're competing with are your immediate peers, your friends, to get like the kind of scarix of work. And there's also a huge issue with being underpaid. I mean, that did hit the news quite recently. There have been cases about universities having to pay back casual lecturers,
absolutely,
because we get paid a set amount, and if we go past that, even if we need to write lectures, to do marking, the idea is that we are choosing to spend that extra time.
Yeah, I guess that like would even almost affect the quality of education. So I think it really is important to be supporting everyone, and particularly academics who do often really care about what they're talking about. And I think a lot of people at USYD and other universities can speak to, they've all had a tutor, or they've all had a unit coordinator, or they've all had a subject where they've been like, I love this. I know that my tutor cares about me. I know that my unit coordinator is really passionate about what they do. And you learn so much from that. And so I think that's really important to, I guess, touch on. But I kind of want to go back to your experience of hustle culture, Meg, particularly when you were doing your PhD. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that? Since we've made a distinction that hustle culture doesn't need to equal girl boss. Like, some people need to do things on the side to survive while they're pursuing their passions. And that's completely different from stepping on other people to get to the top. So do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I guess the first thing is, I mean, if anyone's done sociology and knows about capital, I have a lot of social capital because I have a PhD and was doing a PhD. Didn't have a lot of economic capital. So I had a stipend, which was only 26K, not very easy to live on that in Sydney. Needed to work with other things. Teaching work was not very stable at all. Tutoring work, not very stable at all. So I ended up getting into research work. My first gig kind of working in heritage consultancy was a fluke. I got it because I'd been at the Australian Centre of Public History before. A producer contacted the centre and was like, look, I want to do a doco looking at bushrangers. And even though I look at the non-white men, I am essentially the expert on bushranging in academia at the moment. And so I got to work for the show. And through that, other things kind of snowballed. So one thing I would say is that I've been the beneficiary of goodwill from colleagues and having a good reputation of, being honest and having integrity and being good at my work. And that really has led to a lot of different opportunities. Take opportunities when they come along, even if you're not planning on them, because things do progress later on. You'll make contacts, you'll make connections that then will lead to other jobs.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll talk more about that later as well. Networking and making connections. Is
just
really
important.
Yeah,
I just
absolutely.
Jump in. Hustle culture.
For sure.
Hustle culture is ingrained into how I was brought up. As in, my parents moved here when I was in my mom's womb. They left their country to give me essentially a better life, and I'm indebted to that. If they weren't hustling to get me here, I would not be in this position. So I think there is a really clear distinction between what hustle culture is and what girl boss is. And I'll be honest, I didn't know that girl boss was a really big thing. Anyway, maybe that's just me. And I'm just not really into that stuff. But I think there's a really clear distinction between that, because you can work really hard. You can be really respectful to what has come before you. You can be really grateful for all the opportunities that you've been provided and really make something of it, but still stay true to your roots, and I think that speaks more to you as a person than it ever will in your career, and you honestly, you never know who you're going to bump into. You never know whether the person that you saw down the street is going to be one day your co-worker, or one day someone who is really influential that, and I think that's a really important part, like bringing the humanity back into things. And regardless of who you are, where you've come from, whatever walk of life you've come from, this whole hustle culture, I think, is so important. To
guys, I guess, understand and appreciate. But I think it's also just in general, one of the things I wanted to achieve with this was kind of breaking down the idea of the girl boss stereotype, because it can be really toxic. And I think something that would be awesome is if it was turned into something human and actually good, rather than just the stereotype of someone that a lot of people shouldn't aspire to, I suppose. And so bringing the humanity back into that, and appreciating hustle culture, and kind of tying that to a better definition of what a girl boss is, someone who cares about others and who is genuine in their connections and makes most of opportunities rather than stepping on other people, I think is a really awesome thing. So thank you so much, everyone, for touching on that. I guess I wanted to talk about as well, before we move on to the next segment, is what elements of your leadership style have been inspired by others? And I think this is also tied in nicely to what we've spoken about already. Would anyone like to jump in on this?
I can follow on from what I said before about leadership being inherently tied to support.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's saying my internet connection's unstable, so apologies.
I can still hear you.
I also have realized as this talk has gone on, I've gotten redder and redder, and I now just resemble a carrot or a strawberry. So I really...
Sorry, that's me 90% of the time.
Anyway, maybe humility then is a good element of being a leader and being able to take the piss out of yourself. But I think support and collaboration I think is a really fundamental part of being a leader, and for the reasons that we've all spoken about, it doesn't make sense I actually have never, like you, Jess, never really engaged with never really engaged with the girl boss idea, which makes me feel like a bit of a boomer, but but I think reflecting on it after, Zara, you sent across the sort of topics for discussion, and I reflected on it, I thought to myself, well, I've never really considered myself as a girl boss, because I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family and community down in Canberra that was incredibly diverse, both in terms of gender and culturally, and socioeconomically, for part of my life. And then I went on to boarding school and that completely changed. But anyway, that part of my life was really formative, because it just made me not sort of see myself as different to anyone else. And so I've never thought of myself as a girl boss. And I actually find that concept quite restrictive.
Oh, absolutely. Hands down, agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that what you've described about that, what's inherent to, I guess, what would be I don't know, the girl boss idea of leadership is fundamentally contradictory to what I think a good leader would
Yeah,
be.
thank you so much for bringing that up. I think that's a really, really important point. Now we've talked about value of arts grad and kind of leadership and
sorry, Zara. I just had a thought. You know, I think people equate leadership with a position. I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
You don't need to be a director or and definitely there is so much value in that. But you know, it doesn't mean that when you're in uni, you're not a leader. Because I think that's a really important thing. And I think that's an important way of thinking when you're going post your arts degree into like the workforce, because if you don't ever think of yourself that way, you just won't act in that way. Well, that's what I think anyway. You just always think, you know, my destiny is controlled by other people, what someone else has dictated in the past, instead of actually, again, you know, taking that in your stride and using, again, those opportunities, whether or not that's in your career space or just in your personal life. You know, everyone shows leadership in many different ways, and it's not necessarily the paycheck you get at the end of the month that dictates that, but often your contribution beyond that. And to me, that's far more valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I think everyone in most positions, like, you'll have to start somewhere. And I think you can be a leader in everyday life and what you do and in your career. And that's why we're here today. Like, this is an active leadership, is speaking on behalf of our experiences. And we'll talk a bit more about student leadership later, because that's a really interesting point. And I think it's so true for most of the people coming to this panel today. So we'll change course to gender, and controversial topic, but this is a women's panel and we're going to be honest about it. So has gender had an impact on your experience in the workplace? Is there power in that? If so, how? Feel free to be as honest as possible about your experiences.
I'm going to throw something in that might surprise y'all, and that is that I've had interestingly fantastic experiences with cis men in terms of gender in the workplace. I've been, I think, really fortunate, because I know a lot of friends of mine have not. And I think in part that might be to do with the industry that I'm in, not for profit. I don't want to make a generalization here, but like, people, maybe it's fair to say that people who go into not-for-profits are aware of these kinds of issues, because, you know, they are often the topics or the purposes of various not-for-profits. But so I've had really good experiences with men. Interestingly, though, I've had bad experiences with women, and that has been really disappointing. And I wanted to raise that because I think it's a bit of a surprise, but something that we should talk about a bit. I'd be interested to know if any of
for sure
have had that.
Yeah, I want to make it clear that this isn't a guy bashing session. This was just talking about our experiences of gender in the workplace, because everyone's going to have a different experience. Like you said, Olivia, like, it's not always going to be what we expect, but sometimes it is absolutely what we expect. And I know in my field of work, at least, it is dominated by conservative white men. So sometimes you do experience that, but I agree. Like, you can experience negative things from anyone. And on the contrary, like, I've also had a lot of men and women in my life who have supported me. And yeah, does anyone else want to speak to that?
I will, because I think in terms of experiencing gender in the workplace, a lot of it does have to do with age. And, you know, I don't want to dissuade anyone from starting like tracing their dreams young, but I know definitely I started working when I was 17, full-time in the media, and with it brought a lot of, you know, instances of harassment and abuse, of which I didn't even. I do apologize for the co-star in my background right now.
I'm not part of the problem.
My resident white man. He just said he's not part of the problem.
I am not part of the problem.
Anyway, but yeah, sorry. Just as I was bringing up harassment and abuse in the in the early stages of the career. No, what I meant to say was I think it is, very prevalent, and I don't think we can discount that this is an unfortunate reality a lot of people have to deal with. A lot of it is skewed towards race and gender, if not all of it, or predominantly the majority of it. And it left me with quite a chip on my shoulder quite early on, because I thought, if this is what it's going to be like, why the hell would I ever bother to pursue absolutely anything? But in the exact same length, there are people that are very cognizant of it. And I think people that may either have, experience with the exact same things that they can empathize with, or people that are just so kind of over very archaic ways of conducting business to speaking to people that are young in different industries. And I think it's really powerful to be able to attach yourself with them, to align with them. I mean, this is the thing. I know we were just speaking about, females versus males and how they support you in different ways. I've had incredible mentors in both, but the first time I think I've ever been able to actively speak about kind of the darker aspects of my early career was with my male boss, who is the scariest man alive. And I can't believe I ever opened up to him, but I've never seen such an unparalleled level of empathy from someone who directly from the outside acknowledged that they'd never had an experience or anywhere remotely close to it, and yet was so empowering and so supportive. So it exists. I think it's just like, I would like to think in my job I work to bring it to awareness and hopefully change the pace.
Yeah, for sure. I think awareness is really important.
Yeah.
I think it is really good to see that the culture is changing. And Bianca, I'm sure in your work you've written about this, like the culture is changing, and I guess holding people to account, but holding everyone to account, make sure that we treat each other with kindness and respect. Respect is the most important thing, obviously, regardless of who you are, what your gender expression is, what racial background you come from, or your disability status. I think that's really important. Thanks so much for opening up that discussion. I think that's really important. I just want to change tune a bit as we're kind of coming to the last 15 minutes of this discussion. A lot of art students struggle to find work in their preferred industry or something that they love. How can we as art students actively seek out connections and make the best of those opportunities? Would anyone like to jump in on that?
Oh, I will again, if no one minds. Because I think there's something to be said about chance, which is the most annoying thing on the planet. I mean, I'm someone who's like truly never believed in nepotism or networking, although not going to discount it works, and don't take that off the agenda. But I got my first job, which, as I said, I was later fired from at 18 and cried for 4 days, by talking to my student reception lady, because it may come as a shock to some of you, but I was constantly in trouble in high school. And she's like, oh, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And I'm like, Jesus Christ, it's a bit of a loaded question. I'm like 16 and a half years old.
And you don't need to know. And you don't need to know what that is. You don't need to know now.
Very fortunately, as someone with no talent outside of talking constantly and writing occasionally, I said journalism, and she's like, oh, like funny you say that. Like my husband works in a media company, he's looking for interns. And then 3 months later, like got a foot in the door of an industry I genuinely have only ever been told, like, you need to know someone or blah, 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 blah. So I think that's a huge part of it. I also think, particularly with arts degrees, as I said before, I was fired, and I was also made redundant while I was still studying at uni. So if you need some proof that you can bounce back, it's probably not here, but it happens.
Well, that's really encouraging to hear.
Accessing the careers portal was wildly useful. I mean,
I
know
guys.
Shit, but it's so good. It's so good. I honestly think sometimes I wish I still had access to it, because LinkedIn is a battleground of egos and just like updates I could not care less about from people I don't know, but for some reason have a connection with. And it's so fascinating to see kind of the myriad of opportunities that are there.
Yeah.
Also, just like Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, for anyone who's tuning in from other universities, I'm sure your uni will have a similar thing, and it's probably sent to you via your email, or you can access it through Canvas or whatever medium that they use. Yeah, Bianca, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I was just going to say, I feel like employers are really obsessed with young people at the moment as well. They're like, oh, like you're so different and unique in the way you think. And it's because they see like a 15-second TikTok, they can't understand like how it appeared on their phone. So I would really use that to your advantage and being like, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I want to do. I'm looking to learn in these fields. Can you help? And I would genuinely say like 9 times out of 10 people would say, yeah, what can we do for you? Which is really cool.
Amazing.
I just jump on the back of that. Sorry, Zara.
No, for sure.
But I completely agree. And I think asking for something that I did and have continue to do is ask people for advice, because people love to talk about themselves. You know, they love to offer their advice. And I don't mean that, you know, in some cases that might be self-indulgence, but largely it's because people want to help. And so I have asked people for advice since I finished my honours and rapped on the door at the Ethics Centre all the way through, and that has helped me get every single connection and build every single relationship that has led me to the job that I'm in today, and I have no doubt will lead me to the job that I go to whenever. So asking people for advice, and you'd be surprised. Like I actually heard about someone the other day who wrote to, you know, someone like Penny Wong and just asked for advice. And she responded, you know what I mean?
And that's absolutely an avenue. MPs will actually respond a lot of the time. Yeah, Meg, I was actually just going to ask you there. A question I had for you is for people who don't necessarily have opportunities, and you spoke earlier about your experience with rejection. I think that's an important thing to just normalize and acknowledge. Do you want to talk a bit more about what advice you would give to students about that and making connections?
Yeah, I was actually going to say, I think there are kind of 3 things that are key to finding any type of work: initiative, perseverance, and luck.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I want to really, as you say, normalize, because I know, I mean, if anyone's like me, I was a delicate little flower, and the thought of kind of putting myself out there was really scary, and then getting rejection was really scary. Luck is so much a part of getting anything. It doesn't, because you don't get something, it doesn't mean you're terrible. It doesn't mean you're never going to get work. It doesn't mean that no one thinks you're worth anything as a person. It doesn't mean that you're not going to go off and do fabulous things.
Yeah, absolutely.
It does come down to luck sometimes, being in the right place, the right time, knowing the right person. And then obviously, if you do good work, that comes back. And you've got to try to pay it forward as well when luck does come your way. But that's the advice I would give.
Yeah, great.
My little 20-year-old self finishing that too.
Of course. That's really valuable.
Zara, I just wanted to, something I was just thinking about mentoring. When I was in uni, and when I probably to this day, just the word networking, I don't know, just I never really cared about it. And I think, because I think of relationships in just a different way. Like, I think sometimes networking, you kind of, okay, what's this person going to do for me? What are we going to bring to the table? It's very like consumer-like, can be. And for me, that just doesn't pass. I just really hate small talk. Like, I can talk, but it's just not what I enjoy. And so I think when you're thinking about mentoring or networking or finding that like industry connection or whatever you might want to do, I think it's just important to recognize who you are and what you're looking for. Like, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be your foot in the door, for your dream career that's going to take you to the end of your working life, and like, you know, it's going to be all sweet and lovely. That may not be like, I at my old workplace, like, realized that just the nature of the work was that you kind of never really had a stable job, even though I was employed. So it was based on like projects that you did and like how much money, and once that was over, like, you better find another job because you can't be unaccounted for your time. And I was like, what? I signed up for a job like to have security, not to have to find a job every 8 weeks after I finish a project. And I think from that, like, I realized it was so important just to stick with people that you knew had your back.
Yeah.
And it didn't need to be like the whole company. It just had to be 1 or 2 people that, you know, that you knew you could kind of be honest with your position and what you wanted to achieve, and have those frank discussions. So I think, like, yeah, would encourage, you know, if you're thinking about like mentoring or like reaching out to someone, like, people are definitely willing to. I think it's also like the onus is on you to kind of know what you're looking for at the same time. Like, you know, if you're looking for someone to kind of be like, hey, like, we're in similar life circumstance, like, I just want to learn a bit more about you, or like, hey, I really admire what you did with this, like, how can I learn more, or something. It just, I feel, makes it a bit easier and less daunting, you know, and you kind of have that footing.
Sorry, I know we need to move on because I'm aware of the time, but I just want to bring this back to gender. And also back to power. What I wish I knew was that if you have someone you want to be a mentor and who's opened doors for you, and then they start acting inappropriately, leave.
Yeah.
Even, I mean, and this is really, really hard, especially because that mentor, you have them as a mentor because they have a certain degree of power in certain fields like mine. Like, having connections, having someone say something good about you does open other doors. But there will be other people. And more often than not, when you start to speak to other people in your field or your colleagues who you're comfortable with, they may have had a similar experience. And so leave that person, even if they were previously, you know, a great person for opening doors. It's not worth it. And you may not feel comfortable actually taking formal procedures against someone, but you don't have to stay in that type of relationship hoping that they throw you another scrap of opportunity. Go to someone else and speak to, I mean, in my case, it was like a female, I spoke to a female mentor who I really trusted about the situation. And there are other people. You do not have to stay, because there can be abusive mentor-mentee relationships as well. So if at any stage you feel uncomfortable, you have the right to leave. It's not going to ruin your career. And find other people who you trust and who are your allies.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up, Meg. I think that's really important to, I guess, value yourself and know your limits. That's really important. I think it's an experience that it can be really common. And unfortunately, the evidence suggests that it is. So thank you for bringing that up. And I think that's a very valid and important point. So I hope everyone just takes that awareness. Let's move a bit to a Q&A. So we've had some, we'll try and breeze through this relatively quickly. But one thing that had come up is a bit of engagement in student society. So one thing that I would like to say is I think engaging in student societies is a great way to connect with other people and, to use the dirty word, network, and to learn more about other people and gain those connections for your future. And that will also, by engaging in student societies, lead you to things like this, panels, and learning from other people and hearing from people who have career experience extensively. So did you guys engage in student societies, and would you recommend it?
I didn't at all. And I wish that I had in hindsight, so yes, I would recommend it, but not from personal experience. But something that I also think is useful is finding the organizations or think tanks or peak bodies or whoever operates in this position in the industry that you're potentially interested in moving into. And they often have events that are either relatively affordable or free, that are panel discussions and networking events and so on. So I would also suggest that people do that as well.
Great.
But I wish that I had been more involved or had been involved at all in student societies when I was at uni.
Great. Thank you so much. We've actually got a question, and we'll take a live question from Ella about hustle culture. Ella, if you'd like to put on your camera and unmute your mic, please feel free to go ahead and ask a question.
Hi. So this is sort of about like how we were talking about hustle culture before, I felt a little bit of pressure to sort of be a hustler in lockdown. But because of being locked inside my room, there's not really as many opportunities as like you guys would have going through uni, be able to attend like actual classes. So I guess, what sort of advice do you have for advancing your career while stuck in lockdown?
Great question. Thank you so much, Ella. Does anyone want to take that?
I'm happy to take that.
Yeah, you've been quite busy, so I think this would be good.
Sorry. Yeah, I think you're not alone. Like, you're not the only person, Ella, who's feeling this change because of COVID. People are really good at putting up masks and putting up facades and pretending like the world is turning the way it always has. Beneath all of that, I think there is a lot of discomfort with how things are going, and even just the instability of where things are heading to. For a lot of, for a lot of people, organizations are like, whatever. I think part of perhaps maybe a way to think about hustle culture is not necessarily the things that you do as outputs, but also things that you do to grow who you are as a person yourself, and also recognize that a lot of the changes that you're experiencing will actually become reality once things go back to sort of normal life. So what I mean by that is, even in the workplace that I work in, it was just not ever thought of to work from home.
Yeah.
And I think like COVID has really changed that, has changed that perception of like, what you bring to the table isn't necessarily because you're in an office 9 to 5 and you can show your face for that. I think there are a lot of different changes that are going on. And I think it's important to kind of embrace that at the same time. But I think also just acknowledge that like it is really hard and there are no clear-cut answers to what it may look like. But I think with like just technology, it's just a really great platform, like seriously. And in some ways it's a bit more daunting because you kind of can't put your full self out there, but at the same time, I don't think that discounts you from anything.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Jess. We'll take another question and then we'll wrap up. I think we've had a brilliant discussion here today, and I'm really grateful for all the things we've been able to talk about. So I'm going to call on Riley if you'd like to chuck on your camera and unmute your mic.
Sorry guys, forgot I had a background there. Hi.
Oh, good. I love it.
I would like it was a theme, the Met Gala theme. Anyway, I'd like to ask if there was one thing that you could tell your undergraduate selves, what would it be?
Fantastic question. Thank you.
Ooh, stop caring about your appearance, your relationships. No, sorry, your romantic relationship. And and stop caring about your appearance. Again, literally, like, provided you're hygienic, no one gives a shit about what you look like. That it's so true.
Awesome.
And that like crippled me. It still does, but just ignore it. Get rid of those thoughts now. It is a gatekeeper to your success.
Yeah, great point. I think this would be a great one to wrap up on. So if everyone would like to jump in on this question, what advice would you have for your undergraduate self?
Sorry, I'll add, don't drink too much, especially on Zoom calls.
Jealous of your Negroni there, Bianca. PS. Like, seriously, very jealous. I would tell myself to, it's similar vein, basically just chill out and stop stressing so much about it, because that gut instinct has ended up being the thing that, got me on the right track anyway. And I went through many periods and still go through periods of like intense anxiety. And I think, that insight would have really helped. I think the don't drink so much as well at uni is probably a good piece of information too.
Awesome. Meg, do you want to speak?
Yeah, I would probably say it's okay to fail sometimes, even if it feels really hard and it seems like your world is crashing down. It's not the end of the world. You will find something else. It's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to not know what direction you want to go in yet. It's okay to do that at any age, seriously, let alone in your 20s. And I think, yeah, kind of like what Olivia was saying, trust the process and trust that you know yourself, and hopefully with a bit of perseverance, everything will work out.
Amazing. Thank you. Jess, closing comments from you?
Yeah, I think I would tell myself that, actually, this is what I've recently thought about. Just having a grounded perception of your own self-awareness, I think has been the most helpful thing from finishing uni. Like, just knowing who I am as a person, knowing things that I really enjoy, knowing things that I'm really bad at, being able to kind of differentiate between what people think I should do versus what I want to do, or, you know, all those things. It's just so fundamental to you as a person. And I think if you come away with that sense of self-awareness from a uni degree, you're as equipped as anyone to go into the workplace,
Absolutely.
and to do whatever you want to do in life, you know.
Awesome. Okay, so that pretty much takes us to the end of our session. Thank you so much for all sharing those insights. They were so incredibly invaluable. And thank you for your time. I hope for everyone who joined today, you enjoyed listening to our panelists, asking questions, and most of all, learned something really valuable about your future as an arts grad, what it means to be a woman in the workforce, and how you can actually potentially be an advocate in your field of work. I would like to do some thank yous. So I'd obviously like to thank in alphabetical order our speakers, Bianca, Meg, Olivia, and Jess for joining today. Your insights have been incredible, and I'm so grateful for your time and for having you here. I really love how we talked about authenticity and just being genuine, and that's how you're going to make connections and actually better yourself, and also valuing critical thinking. And yeah, I just think that's kind of a lovely overarching theme that we've talked about, and I'm really grateful for that. I'd also love to thank my team, so the women's subcommittee, Analyst, Bella, and Tara. Thank you for all of your help, and the rest of the panel team, Angelina, Emily, Jamaica, Jen, and Katie, for your help organizing the event. And of course, I would like to thank the current SASS president, Nicole, for all of her support and guidance during this time. She's been a great help to getting this on its feet and being a mentor to me, and to making sure this all runs smoothly. So for anyone who had questions, we apologize if we weren't able to get to them today, but if you're keen and want to know more, please email them to the email that Nicole will drop in the chat, which is womens@usydarts.com, and we'll keep them in mind for future panels.